Elizabeth, coming to you from Mysteries in Penrith, Australia. I'm joined today by Kelly for a conversation with Cacao.
Ka-ching. Hello.
Hello. Thank you so much for joining me today, Kelly. And just to open up and introduce who Kelly is my sister. And if you watched the previous podcast or previous conversation with Cacao, where I was joined with Sophia Michelle, we talked about how people get the two of us mixed up and sometimes often ask really, are we sisters? So it just was clear as anything that the very next conversation with Cacao included my sister. And we're here to share some stories and gain some insights and just see where the conversation goes. So welcome, and thanks again, Kelly, for joining us.
No worries. We might have a few giggles along the way because when we were growing up, do you remember sometimes I'd try and tell you something serious, really awful and serious, but I would giggle at the same time. And I would come up to you and say, I've got something really bad. And then you get the giggles because you get really nervous about what was coming.
Yes.
Our way of dealing with it was to have a giggle.
And what certainly Sophia and I have spoken about a lot is the use of laughter to raise the vibrations. And so when I think back at those times, it was the nervousness and not knowing what the correct response was going to be. But really, when you unpack that, what we were doing innately was raising our vibration so we could cope with that news, because it is pretty heavy and we're not necessarily taught with how to handle such news. And so what were we to do with that?
Getting bogged down in the seriousness of it. Yeah, it was a way of dealing with it. So,
yeah.
But, we're sisters, so we're playful.
We've got a language. Sisters have a language, right? And we understand what that language is. And that's what.
And we shared a room for, gosh, how many years?
Well, I was 20 before I had a room to myself. So for me, it was up until the age of 20 that we were sharing a room for a majority of that time.
Yeah. In bunk beds.
Yes. And some of our early experiences, if you're okay for us to share some of those.
Go for it.
But we just had this feeling or this knowing that we had a presence in our room. And when we were fortunate enough to have a radio, remember that little tape deck radio that we had in our bedroom? And we were so excited because then we could play the radio and music and record, do mixtapes and things like that. But the volume would suddenly change on our radio.
I don't remember that.
Really? That's one of the things I remember a lot. Sometimes the station would change and feeling really freaked out by that, but somehow knowing that wasn't normal or supposed to happen, but not understanding what it could possibly be. But we talked about having this presence or this ghost in our room that we both felt from time to time.
I think my first memory of it was being a very small child sitting on the floor playing and feeling like there were three faces watching me. And I don't even know that I could speak back then, but I was playing something and I could almost see, I can still see them now looking down at me and saying, oh, she's starting to figure things out, isn't she? Or she's growing or progressing, isn't she? And I still have that memory of it. And I think back now, and it felt normal, wasn't at all freaked out by it, but I just knew that I was being watched over. Have I told you that?
Yes, you have. But do you have a sense of maybe who that was?
They were old faces, and I felt like they were great. That was like great grandparent kind of vibes. But to me, they still look like a little flash over there in the corner.
Oh.
Yeah, that's my sign. I get a little spark when I say something that's on the money. Out of the corner of my eye, this little flash will appear.
Yeah, and what happens for me is I get the truth bumps, so those goosebumps, and they just crawl up your legs or up your entire body, which is what I got when you said that. And well, for me, I have two very early memories that, as an older person, I can look back and reflect they were signs of connectedness and a knowing. And one of them was when I did have the room to myself because I was still in a cot. And if you remember, that bedroom looked straight out into the kitchen. And I have a memory of, I don't know if I was sat up in my cot or I stood up in my cot, but I looked out into the kitchen where our grandparents were there with my parents, and I could see and hear some conversations happening. And I remember looking out and having this thought, oh, here we go again. And it was like life. Here we go again. I'm on this train of life.
And you never told me this.
It's only come back into my awareness over the last few years, and through teaching psychic development and teaching tarot and Reiki and the beautiful connections that are made, you're constantly peeling back layers and revealing through the process of helping others to do the same thing. And so these things have come back into my awareness, and that's probably my earliest memory. And the other memory that I have is learning for the first time the concept of reincarnation. And raised in the religion that we were raised in, it was not something that you talked about or accepted to be truth. But I remember hearing about it. And I don't know whether you came home from school and talked about it, or probably not school, but wherever it was, I heard about it. And I was probably about 4 or 5 years old. And I remember, I could probably almost put my hands on my hips and went, well, I hope that's not true, because I don't want to do this again. Being a kid's too hard. I hate being told what to do. Just really put out by that, because it was like that process of childhood. And I think that was because you come in knowing, and you come in with this ancient knowledge, but you still have to go through your apprenticeship every single time that you incarnate into this lifetime. It was like, oh, I've got to do all of that again and have all these people tell me what to do when I already know.
See, I'm learning stuff about you now. I didn't know that either.
Oh, really?
No, I remember, my first real memory awareness of what reincarnation was when Shirley MacLaine's books came out. And being raised the way we had been raised, in the religion we'd had been raised, that was never, ever mentioned. And I remember thinking, how could they keep that from us?
Wow.
How is that? And I remember in particular the women in my life, my friends' mothers, who also were good church-going women, were reading this book. And I felt it was my first rise of divine feminine, without knowing that that's what that was. But it was almost like naughty to read about it, but made so much sense to the women that were reading it, and it was being spoken about. And it was just one of those first moments of knowing there was a lot more.
Yeah, and so potentially, if you look back, could you see that then as was potentially their awakening, the beginning of their awakening, almost especially if they'd been raised in this doctrine of not knowing.
You didn't question things. It was wrong to question things. But it was like they were kind of just peeling off a layer or two.
And to be outwardly reading it, not behind closed doors or behind the cover of an acceptable book.
And I think with our generation, we're sort of in that bridging zone where it was becoming okay to read about these sorts of things. I remember the Celestine prophecy and what a slap in the face that was at the time. And I've gone back to read that like 20 or 30 years later, and it didn't have nearly the impact or shock value.
Yeah.
Because I was like, oh, yeah, that happened. And we did that. Yes, I've done that. Yes, that's happened to me.
It became a bit of a checklist.
A checklist of like, so it was like, yeah. And I went and read all those books, all the Celestine prophecy books, but it was liberating.
Yeah, but it still holds true for those people that might be at the beginning of their journey and wondering where they can access some of this information that's digestible and accessible, but still wow enough to go, there's so much ahead of it for me.
Yeah.
Is it possible? Well, we have a lived experience with that.
Yeah. But I remember we were in our 20s, I think, when the Celestine, one of my friends said, hey, you've got to read this book. This is crazy. And reading it, just thinking it was, oh my gosh, imagine that happening to me. But yeah, beautiful to look back and go, oh yeah, that's happened. And, little sprinkled seeds and nuggets throughout my life that even today I still think back on.
Was one of the few books that I've actually completed, because I'm one of the classic people that start books and then I'll start another book and then start another book, and I've got bookmarks from all over the world that people have gifted me, and they're all nestled somewhere in a book that I've begun with high hopes of finishing it. That's another conversation. But the Celestine Prophecy was one of those books that I did finish. One, because I was fascinated, amazed, but I wanted to be able to have the conversation because I knew that you had read it, and I wanted to be able to participate in that.
And having, it was something like we gave each other permission to be able to talk about it because, like I said, we weren't raised with those kind of, you just didn't, like you said, you just didn't question things. You just accepted that's what was being told.
And what's just jumped right in now is something that was fairly mainstream to watch, but we still huddle together on the bottom bunk with a little portable TV every Friday night, I think it was, watching the X-Files. Oh. Crapping ourselves, but forcing ourselves to watch it because we were fascinated, because it just started to reach beyond science of what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you'd wait for the ad break and go, I've got to go to the toilet. Can we turn the light on? Yeah. But going back to Shirley MacLaine, and I know like Hollywood made so much fun of her for what she did. I thought it was a lot of courage in that. And sometimes I talk to other people or hear other channelers or whatever, and they talk about things that opened up for them, and it was her books and things that I read and was fascinated by, but sort of kind of knew at the same time. Somehow there was some part of me, but it opened up the idea of what channeling was, as well as reincarnation. It opened up the Pleiades and
oh, did it?
Yeah, because there's these kind of characters in her book, or people that are amalgamation of a few different people in her life that she kind of made into one character. And when they had it revealed to them that this woman that he was dating was actually from the Pleiades, and she's going, what the fuck, this is mumbo jumbo, how can I even talk about this sort of stuff? Or you're absolutely crazy. And there's that scene where she's in the car driving and he says, let go of the wheel, and she lets go of the wheel, or he lets go of the wheel, and the car just, and she's like in absolute utter disbelief. But this was so far removed from what our upbringing was, but it all made sense. And there's like, I still think about that was back in late 80s, early 90s. So even then I had this awareness from that moment that not every body walking around was necessarily human. Yeah, always wanting to meet someone myself. I want one of those in my life.
But you have many times over.
Yes,
and we all have many times
and
over.
then wondering if I was one of those as well. Sometimes it kind of really spoke to me back then. And yes, and then remember when we became mothers, we had no place in our head, and now we just had to live day to day.
Yes.
Functioning.
Yes.
And so a lot of that kind of went to the side.
But a little window still cracked open, and witnessing in our own children them being born knowing beings and their little connections to the spirit world before it starts to water down in them. And, them speaking to a grandparent that's on the other side, or recognizing that grandparent's there and around, and asking them questions about that. So,
and thankfully for them, having, not that our parents ever did this, but we live in a time now where we don't shut those kind of things down in children. There's so much more acceptance. Like the generations that are coming through now are nurtured by us, and there were people before us who pioneered the way, and we've pioneered a way for them. And these things are acceptable way. I don't like that word acceptable, but part of being.
Yeah, it's about coming back to your truth, the truth of who you are and your essence, and being soul-led and soul-driven, that, we're a soul that inhabits this body, but our soul is us. That is us. That is our essence. And so it's coming back to the truth and authenticity of the soul and the journey of the soul.
And it's been lovely like I've heard this many other times, but the body being within the soul as opposed to the soul being within the body. And I don't like to listen to too many channels, but I did listen to Daryl Anker the other day talking, and sometimes you hear it and you go, "Oh, you've just said what I know," but you've put it in such a way that it makes even more sense to me.
Was this him channeling Bashar,
No,
or was this him
he was talking
unpacking?
Yes, and it was this. Think of the soul. Well, I guess we would use oversoul as like this sort of sphere, and when it wants to incarnate into a body, it pulls all the threads that it wants to have in this particular incarnation. That becomes the human, and so we're really. Yeah, I'm not going to explain this particularly well, but when you spoke of it, I was like, oh yes, and I could just see electrical bolts and shreds and threads, and that will weave into our DNA for this lifetime. So that's why we feel those memories of pasts, because sometimes they are threaded in, and when you die, you expand back out, and then you come back in another form of incarnation. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I'd like to go back and watch it again, because I heard it, and I have actually been walking through life just thinking of myself as, and I work in biofield. That's part of my journey of healing, is to help people in their with the stored memories that are part of the biofield. So yeah, I can kind of visualize it even more. Yeah, but it was a really beautiful way of presenting that.
So I guess I have a question on that, and it's a curiosity that you might not be able to address. But if we're pulling in these threads for this particular lifetime, I can connect with that. But does that then mean that there are threads that we choose not to bring into this lifetime that we might utilize in another lifetime based on the experience we need to have there?
Yes.
And would they then, the unused thread, be sitting in the Akashic, or are we just, is that part of the library that we don't have access to in this particular lifetime because it's not part of the soul's journey at this time? It's a curiosity.
Yeah, and I think I have evolving thoughts on that. So no, nothing's solidified, but I do wonder, we talk about what we have as humans at our disposal, what we can access. And I think that it's part of our divinity to be able to access that if we wanted to, whether we choose to. I still grapple with what we should tap into as humans that we don't, or what really is not actually a help. And sometimes I've heard people say trying to go back to your past lives really isn't that helpful.
Sorry, just having a sip of my cacao.
I know
you were going to speak a little longer on that.
No, it's still
But actually, just circling back to something that you touched on before, I think we need to tease out a little bit, because part of these conversation with Cacao series is for all of us to get to know our practitioners on a deeper level. And Kelly offers biofield tuning at this venue and via distance, and you can connect with us to find out the details of how you can book in with Kelly. But could you just tell us a bit more about the service that you offer and what that is?
It's I'll try and truncate it and make it accessible. So fortunately, and I think it was because you introduced me to somebody who did this, I got introduced into biofield tuning. And being a music teacher for many, many years, I was very aware of the impact sound had on the students I taught. So I could see how different they were. When we had choir, I'd watch how they would just buzz, and there would be something that connected them. They became, I always think of it as, fish in the ocean. They would kind of all end up carrying each other, or watching students perform on an instrument, whatever capacity that, or composing music or whatever. So I could always see within them something would change. And I knew my time as a teacher it hasn't come to an end, and nor do I think it will, but it needed to go in some other directions. I needed to know who was I beyond being a teacher. What other identities do I have? And healing sort of was started to play out in that. And then I got introduced to biofield tuning, and yeah, I haven't really looked back. So I became, I did the training to become a biofield tuner, and that's based on the work of Eileen Day McCusick. And I've also been very fortunate to study under one of our wonderful Australian practitioners in what she has carved out as Sonaki. Her name's Amanda, and she has a very unique way of using tuning forks. Both methods use tuning forks. I think you're going to have to ask me some questions to unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, well,
because there's so much to say, but I think if you could ask me a
Yes.
question or two, so I can reduce it down
Well,
to
I mean,
understand more.
you run workshops so that people can understand a lot more about the biofield and the use of tuning forks, using them for themselves and the benefits of that. So it's very practical and accessible for how can I use that for myself. But you as a practitioner, why would someone come to see you for a session?
So I have lots of different people come for all sorts of reasons. Some people feel there's something stuck within them and they can't move forward or beyond. And I think, if you were missing a vitamin and you couldn't create that yourself, you would go and access a vitamin to try and help, become a better version of your physical self. So I'd say people come when there is a sense of heightened stress, not being able to access a part of themselves. So I'll try and talk a bit more about that later on. It's like I said before, a sense of stuck energy. And in its nuts and bolts, it's really about resetting the nervous system. And the way I'll try and put it like this. Just gathering my thoughts. Hang on a second. So if you sit in a workshop with me, one of the first things I will get you to do would be to actually tap into your biofield. So it's the electromagnetic field that is a torus around our body, going in this direction and coming back in the other direction. And it's the flow of energy up through what we would call the central channel in both directions. And it extends 6 feet away, right around our body. And through the research that Eileen did, she sort of came up with the idea that where those two directions of energy intersect on the outside is our conception zone. And between our conception zone and our body, it's like the rings of a tree, and every little ring is an imprint of our life year by year. So if you are 80 years old, you've got 80 rings, but they're closer together. And if I tuned someone who was 12 years old, there would be much bigger spaces between those rings. And when you have an event or a trauma, even sometimes something fantastic, but if it's not resolved, it can literally be light leaking out of you and then kind of get stuck in the biofield. And when we strike a tuning fork, because it produces magnetism, and it'll hit where that distortion is, and the fork will go out of tune, or I just simply cannot move it. And the tuning forks are tuned to nature's frequencies. You might see that pairs that are aligned with the Fibonacci sequence, with the Schumann resonance, within the way spirals grow. And it will reorganize that area that, what do we call it? Also known as perturbation. So you can't actually get through there. So you sit there with the fork. Sometimes for me, I can pinpoint the age, and I can even see what it is that is an event. And it could be something like, did you fall out of a tree at this age? It'll just sometimes hit like that, and they go, oh my gosh, yes. And I'll be like, okay. And it's like an event that wanted to be witnessed, and the tuning forks bring it back to a state of coherent waveform, and it's suddenly resolved, and we're briefly bringing that back into the body, that energy that was stuck out there, reconfigured or maybe alchemized, and brought back in. So people generally get off the table and go, oh, I feel more like myself. That's one of the first things I hear is, oh, I feel lighter, because literally you've brought light that you've leaked back into the body in a really beautiful, coherent waveform.
Amazing. Excellent explanation. Use a lot of big words in there.
Sorry.
And so for a person coming to have a biofield session, what's that experience like for them? So what's happening? And I'm just talking about it in a very practical sense. They're laying down on a massage table and relaxed.
Oh, I've been told I've never taken mushrooms, but boy, that felt like a trip. Yeah, it's different for everybody. And for most people, because the tuning forks will just hit the electricity of the body and the body just goes, oh, and that's what I hear is, oh. And people just, they don't sleep, but they're not awake. Some people talk the whole time because it's helpful for them, but generally people just go into some kind of very calm state.
So I've been very fortunate to be the guinea pig to a lot of the learnings and the practice of really, I believe, what you've known all along anyway, but it's about having a consciousness about that. And so I've had a lot of experience being on the massage table with the tuning forks, working on my field. And every single session that I've had, whether it's been a short 20-minute practice or a longer hour to an hour and a half embedded deep practice, I have felt the results of that. And often the next day, I can feel a bit groggy, and it's just the body coming back into a recalibration of sorts, perhaps detoxifying, so releasing what's no longer needed. So the chemicals that the body produces in order to deal with trauma you don't know you're actually dealing with or storing there is no longer needed. So it's got to find its way back out again. So ensuring that you are aware of what's potentially afterwards is just being really kind and gentle with yourself if you're feeling just a little bit tired and your body needs to recalibrate. But it's an amazing experience while you're having it done and how you feel afterwards, knowing that you've done something really beneficial for yourself. And there's low impact. You know, some people that might get icked out by having, acupuncture and the thought of needles going in. Fantastic practice, not saying anything about that, but some people are a little bit confronted by that. Or even massaging, where you feel like you're going to, it's the pain of having something worked on. There's no pain or discomfort in having this practice.
And that brings me back to there are sessions where you put tuning forks on the body and it gets into the fascia, into the cells. It helps nitric oxide flow through the body, so your blood flows a lot more. So these are beautiful forks that are made by Soniki, this beautiful business in Brisbane. The quality is just absolutely amazing. But these forks, these are the weighted forks, and these are fantastic just to sit on the body, on pressure points if you know where they are, and on the face, on the legs. And you can start to just feel like the body will just instantly drop and relax. So they've got quite a good vibration. And this is what I teach during workshops as well, how to use the tuning forks on the body. And then you've got these unweighted forks, so there's no barrel at the top. And these are really good. It's kind of fun to play around with. You can put them between your feet and feel where your earth star is. And I think there's probably one person out of 1,000 who couldn't be able to find where those pockets of energy are. And so that's what we would use off the body, and that's like a workhorse kind of fork. But I've created also some beautiful meditations where people can create a good steady flow from the heart, or feeling like you're literally pulling the weight of the world off your shoulders. That's been a really nice way of just letting go and just being able to be a lot more discerning with what's happening around you, as opposed to feeling bogged down and not able to really do much about it. So yeah, these are the tools of the trade.
Some of them, because your kit just keeps growing and growing.
I know. I keep saying, I don't need another fork in my life, but and I find another fork.
But are they like your little babies? Like
Oh,
you look
they're
at them and
lovely.
you just...
They're lovely. They're lovely, and they all do something different. People ask, how do you know which fork to choose? And I'll be like, well, if you're combing your hair and you go, oh, I've hit a snag, this is what I think is a really good way to think about the biofield as well. When you hit a snag and you cannot get through it, you might pick up a wide tooth comb, and then you might pick up a brush. You just kind of feel what it is that needs until you can get a really nice steady flow through your hair. And that's the only best way I can say to describe about what's happening when I'm combing through your biofield. Another way that people might think of it as too is like soul retrieval. So, when we lose part of ourselves, think about when you've seen someone and you go, you look like you've lost your light. You look like you've had a big shock. You just don't look yourself today. And literally you've leaked parts of yourself out, and our job is to find those parts and bring them back in again. So, yeah, it's an ever-evolving learning for me, but it is very powerful.
And holistic in that it addresses body, mind, and soul. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. Yep. Working in your electrical system.
So if someone's got an ongoing pain in their body they just can't get on top of, then that could likely be a trauma from the past, and it's trapped in the field.
Yep.
And working with that field and doing your magic with your magical tools can help resolve that, and therefore over time dissolve perhaps what that physical pain is.
And it could be that you have a pain in your knee, but it will present that needs to be worked somewhere up on your shoulder because you think your attitude puts your spine out of line. Now, I'm not a chiropractor or an osteopath. I don't have a degree in massage, but I can sense where perhaps that's started. And if you think about the way you hold yourself because of an attitude you have, you're putting pressure on your spine or on your muscles, which puts pressure on a certain part of your body. And sometimes people get off the table and they say, oh, I feel taller. And I've actually seen one person in particular, she says, I'm so much taller. And because her attitudes had been changed, or she said, I'm not even worried about this anymore. Those worries and those concerns that bring us down. She's like, oh, and she could breathe. And I was someone I worked with, and I could see she was a totally different human walking through the workplace, and she was definitely a lot taller.
That's fantastic.
I know, I love it,
and it feels really useful and impactful and amazing that there's something very real and actionable, and there's evidence for the benefits.
And if it's too much for you to hold on to all that information, think about how it just feels really nice just to lie down and give yourself a moment.
Let someone else take care of you.
Someone else take care of you. I got to be a guinea pig for someone else the other day. They were doing they were learning the practitioner's course, and someone said, "Can you just lie down and be again?" I was like, "Oh, is this what it's like?"
If I must.
Oh, I was like, "Oh," because I think I see people on the table go, "Oh, I want what they're having."
Yeah.
And I got to experience it, and it was, it was something else. Like, oh, this is amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it has been wonderful talking with you today on camera, because we talk outside of work too, and there is so much more that we can talk about. So there'll be future moments to learn more about you and your journey and what you know and what you can bring to us with your curiosities or your facts. And it's been a pure delight to have you here today. So thank you for joining us with Conversations with Cacao.
Thank you for the cacao.
Until next time, goodbye from Mysteries in Penrith, Australia.